Vabbè, sono emozionata. Sono emozionata perché a parlare di dove va il giornalismo e ricordare Franco Carlini, insomma, insieme è una cosa molto bella. Io devo moltissimo a Franco Carlini, è stato quello che mi ha incoraggiato di più negli anni 90 a continuare a occuparmi di digitale quando tutti mi guardavano in redazione come se fossi matta perché chi se ne frega di internet. E quindi eravamo tutti un po' dei visionari pazzi in un angolino della redazione. Adesso purtroppo siamo in un'era cruciale e drammatica in cui i giornali vanno malissimo e tutti guardano al digitale nella speranza che il digitale salvi i giornali e i modelli di business però sono in crisi, lo sapete meglio di me. Vorrei un'alzata di mano, quanti qua sono giornalisti? Ok, e quanti sono di Genova? Ok, grazie. Era per capire poi nella conversazione con Jeremy White chi abbiamo di fronte. Appunto, siete giornalisti, quindi non c'è bisogno che io vi dica quanto siamo in crisi, quanto ci dispiace, perché il giornalismo è il mestiere più bello del mondo. Io continuo a dirlo, io sono direttrice del Master in giornalismo all'Università di Torino e penso che i ragazzi di oggi che vogliono fare i giornalisti abbiano una passione e un coraggio a scegliere questo mestiere, e avete visto nelle presentazioni prima, ma ne vedrete ancora anche dopo, perché c'è una passione particolare per i nuovi strumenti che permettono di fare questo mestiere in maniera entusiasmante. Il paradosso appunto che c'è la crisi dei modelli di business e gli editori non riescono a trovare i fondi o aiutarci per avere la sicurezza di poter continuare a fare questo mestiere bene, però i giovani che vogliono fare i giornalisti in realtà si inventano modi nuovi, meravigliosi per continuare a fare il mestiere del giornalista anche senza il tesserino. E mi dispiace per l'ordine dei giornalisti, ma siamo in un paese dove purtroppo l'ordine dei giornalisti, a parte quando fa questi bellissimi corsi di formazione, non aiuta questo mestiere a innovarsi abbastanza rapidamente. Il problema è la rapidità, abbiamo bisogno di essere veloci, di fare questa transizione velocemente. Il New York Times la transizione l'ha fatta e i risultati li sta vedendo, sta andando bene. I giornali in America, anche loro, moltissimi giornali vanno malissimo, voi sapete il giornalismo locale va molto male, siamo a Genova e qua a Genova c'è un giornale partner della stampa, perché noi siamo nel grande gruppo Gedi della stampa, qui ci sono rappresentanti del gruppo Gedi che poi parleranno, però il Secolo XIX è un meraviglioso giornale locale, va aiutato dall'editore a poter avere gli strumenti giusti per fare bene il suo mestiere e continuare a fare il suo mestiere. Ne parleremo poi dopo con Giovanni Mari che ci raggiungerà dopo la presentazione di Jeremy White, ma io vi voglio presentare Jeremy White perché Jeremy White, secondo me Franco Carlini sarebbe stato felicissimo di conoscerlo ed è un esempio di giornalismo che riesce a raccontare attraverso i dati quello che succede, e il data journalism in questo caso utilizzato da Jeremy White è stato prezioso per raccontare il disastro del ponte di Genova, del ponte Morandi. Quindi vi voglio presentare e dire chi è Jeremy White per chi non lo conosce. Jeremy White prima di diventare graphic editor del New York Times ha fondato una sua società nel 1998, negli anni 90, negli anni delle start-up, che si chiama Blue Shirt e lì in questa società ha lavorato come grafico digitale per clienti, quindi grandi aziende, tra cui Toyota, Fiat, Sony e Microsoft. Lui si è laureato però alla scuola di giornalismo all'Università del Montana, ha conseguito un master in cartografia e sistemi di informazione geografica presso l'Università del Wisconsin, e adesso è graphic editor del New York Times e insegna alla Columbia University, alla scuola di giornalismo della Columbia University, e tra i suoi progetti a cui ha contribuito ha vinto numerose nomination agli Emmy, ha preso il premio Peabody, riconoscimenti di Society of News Design, World Press Photo e Pictures of the Year International. Quindi insomma è con grande piacere e con grande con grande aspettativa che abbiamo voglia di conoscere il lavoro e conoscere il lavoro di Jeremy White, e vi presento Jeremy.
Thank you, Anna. Oh, you go on. Forward, and back. All right.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Raphael. Thank all of you for showing up, and it's a great honor to be here. I'm going to talk about an issue that you're all probably pretty familiar with, and for many of you, it's a very personal story. This particular project was, in the almost 10 years I've been at the New York Times, this particular project was the most dynamic in terms of the role the graphics played in the reporting. And I'll get to that in a minute, but it was a very unique project, and it was unique for many reasons. There is an Italian version, I'm sure many of you are aware, an Italian version of this story. We choose to translate many of our stories, but this one was very important to get right and to have a very good translation so that later we could go back, and if we had any follow-up stories that we could revisit this and re-promote it. It wasn't just me on this project, and it's true of any project that we work on. Many people are involved. In fact, there's probably more people involved on this project than any of some of your largest projects for some of the smaller newsrooms. But Jim and Gaia were the foreign reporters that were here, the first two listed. So they came to Genoa and stayed. Basically, that's how we got the coverage in the end that we did. They didn't leave. They noticed that there weren't other news outlets following this story like they were, so they stayed and worked with the rest of us back in New York. So I am a graphics editor, and there were several other graphics editors working on this project, different foreign editors, and let's see, Francesca, are you here? Last person listed actually is a stringer, but was at the New York Times for many years and came back to Genoa. So that was just great for us because we had a resource here to get us some of the material that really, really helped with the project. Before I get into the kind of reconstruct of the bridge collapse, and I will mention that that collapse happened 10 months ago today on a bridge that was built in the 1960s by Riccardo Morandi, and it's about 3,600 feet long before the collapse, and it had 12 spans on it, and that's very important as we talk about the collapse. There are a couple different visual story types and things that I've worked on over the years, and I wanted to show you two examples to show you sort of the extreme of two of those, which is something where we're taking a look at the cathedral fire in Notre Dame that happened a little while ago, and this particular project, you'll notice this visual story type, there's not a lot of language you can add to this, right? We can't have very long sentences, we can't have paragraph after paragraph. So we have to be very concise about what we want to say. In this example, we're able to look at one object, essentially, and take a look from many different angles. We considered doing that for the Morandi Bridge, but there was more to tell. You'll notice with this particular story, we're not saying a lot. There are very few words here. There were too many words that we wanted to put with the bridge collapse. We couldn't really use this story form. This story form is very good for a particular type of story. And with the bridge collapse, we probably could have done something more similar to one of our longer forms, and this was a dam collapse in Brazil. So this combines different social media types and on-the-ground reporting with footage that we obtained through different sources. So with something like this, maps make sense, right? This bridge collapsed for miles and miles, this water spread. So, and this is a little nauseating, I apologize, to watch someone else scroll on such a big screen. But what we ended up doing for this was following the path of the water. Basically, as you're scrolling, you're following a path. We break down a couple of key points along the way. So for something like the Genoa Bridge collapse, we could have done something like this particular project where we combine long paragraphs, short recaps, a visual explainer, and sort of walk you through that process. However, with the bridge collapse, we don't need the maps. We didn't have a whole lot of social footage of video or photos that we could have used. There was a video that became very, very important for us for this story that we weren't able to use. And in fact, I can't even tell you who the source was that was able to explain the video. All we can say is there was a police official with direct knowledge of the video. That particular video became very, very important for us for our visual storytelling. So with this example, you can see there are a lot of words, there are maps. We're trying to integrate many different assets into one story. And that was also true with the bridge collapse. All right, so here's a brief timeline of that project. Bridge collapses on the 14th. It's a full week before we start actually sketching and putting things together in for this story. We had a short write-up about the event itself, but for our reconstruct, it was about a week before we started putting things, these assets together. So we had sketches, hand-drawn sketches that we used at first. Then we got some architectural diagrams that we were able to use to help us build the 3D models. Let's see. So the first scene, it took us about 10 days to put that first scene together. So this was not an overnight project. There were many people on this, so it's not as if we turned this around in a day or two. Something like Notre Dame, that happened a lot faster because we had the information a lot faster. Also, we had more people on that project too. So on the 29th, Gaia was still questioning Autostrada about the reports that came out before the collapse that said that there were structural problems with the bridge. So nothing was done, and we wanted to find out why. We didn't really get the answers we were looking for there, other than these were planned changes and planned updates, but nothing happened in the end. So you can see that we have the first, I'll go back one slide, I think we had 1,500 words to start the story, ballooned up to 5,200 words, and the final edit was about 2,700 words. So those visual story types I showed you before, you can't really do that with this many words, right? So final edits on the 5th, and the story is live on the 6th of September. So this is how we worked. Jim and Gaia were in Genoa. The rest of us were in New York, and we just basically did Google Hangouts as often as we could. What became really important were these two things: the drawings they had in Genoa and the renders that we were making in New York. And I mentioned this earlier, the back and forth that we had was very important because we were creating the assets that they would print here and then show to officials to say, this is the story we're running, did we get it right? And then they say, no, you didn't get it right. This is what needs to change. So from those initial sketches that Jim did, and he admits that he can't really draw, but these were great for us because it gave us some clue as to where to start the story and how to break down the individual components, right? So you could see here, he's describing the tilt that's happening, the middle of the bridge breaking apart, and then giving us kind of an idea of which sections to use for the 3D render. And these became very important because from these initial sketches, we were able to create the 3D assets and walk through the process of the collapse. And the marks that you see on this are from one of the officials here saying, no, you got it wrong. This needs to change. This happens first, this happens second. So because of that video, which we weren't able to see, this official was able to describe what was happening and get us through that process. And I have several versions of these renders that I can walk through and explain the difference. So a bit about the source material. We were able to get some drone footage, and this is about a minute long, different footage that we could have used. This is from a helicopter. There was some other footage from drones after, many days after the collapse during the cleanup. And this was also very helpful for our reconstruction because we were able to see where the breaks were and where the debris was in the end. So we were very fortunate to get this source material. We were also very fortunate to get it without a watermark. which was very kind. So the police department here and the fire department here helped us get that source material, and then we tried to decide which material to use for the story. And all of these are pretty amazing, these shots. It shows you sort of the depth. And we ended up using this for the top of the story, the full edit of this drone footage, to give you a sense for the separation between the distance between the top of the bridge and the ground. So during the process of this story, Jim came back to us and said the graphics are going to be even more important than we thought. So we didn't think of this initially as a visual story, but there was no other way to explain what happened in detail. So we started looking at some of the architectural drawings that went into making the bridge in the first place. And these were valuable for a number of reasons. We wanted to get the scale right. We wanted to get the proportions right. We wanted to make sure that if we were removing some of these stays, that we were showing the way that the weight would shift properly. So our stringer here found a book in the library that is basically a breakdown of the construction of the bridge, which was very, very valuable. And you can see, how many of you have seen this, by the way? No one has seen this? One, no, two in the room, I guess, because we pored over this again and again. So our stringer here found it in the library. Based on that, we were actually able to find a digital copy online, which made it easier for us to look at the individual components of the bridge and figure out what went wrong from the description. So along with the photos, we have these, we have a depiction of many different things. And it makes it tough because you never know as a reader what we don't put into a story, and I'll show some of those things that we didn't do. But we considered taking a look at the elevation, taking a look at the riverbed, reconstructing the whole bridge, and taking you along the whole bridge. We didn't do any of those things because we started to, but we discovered that there were better ways to express what we wanted to. But these were very helpful. You can see how it would be nearly impossible to give you an accurate reconstruction without some of these assets. And the photos really help too. Let's see. The image on the is sort of in the center there at the top, and those on the top left here became some of the most important for us to explain two things. The, let's see here, the pre-stressed concrete and the cable stays. So, and also this one in the middle. Those were the three that we used the most. So this was good in sort of for us to tell what was going on within the concrete, because all of the cable stays were within that pre-stressed concrete. And the pre-stressing process, we didn't know anything about that going into this. And we thought maybe we should explain what pre-stressed concrete is. But in the end, it was easier for us to take a look at the cables. And so this is what we got initially. Eventually, the digital version was a lot cleaner, but we were able to then, so I just went through and reconstructed that so that we could use it in a 3D model. Right, so from there, we could see inside this pre-stressed concrete, and then, and this is the final version of the graphic, we can explain what each of these components are. So instead of going into great detail about how you make pre-stressed concrete or what goes into it or why it's important, it just made more sense to give you this kind of breakdown as a cross-section to what failed. Here's something that didn't make it into the story that we considered. So we thought, let's place this missing section back in the context of the city, which kind of makes sense. So you can get you get a sense of scale, but this is what we did in the end. This makes a lot more sense. We're comparing bridge types to the Morandi Bridge with something that would be built today, and the big takeaway here is the redundancy. Redundancy was the most important thing. and one of the reasons the bridge collapsed in the first place. So if you were to build this bridge today, a modern stay bridge would have all of those redundant cables exposed so that you could check them. So we were getting images like this, and this is from one of the, Gaia thinks it was from one of the first responders, but these were very helpful in the early stages too, especially this piece off to the right, because that gave us the context for some of the other rubble. And so here are some of those renders that we all collaborated on. So one of my colleagues, Karthik, and I were initially modeling the bridge, but it became an effort for everyone involved, looking at the photos, the initial diagrams of the construction in the first place, and then also that video I mentioned. All of those things were important to find out what needed to be added. So basically we wanted to take a look at different aspects of the bridge failure. And we decided in the end to do it in 4 or 5 steps. And initially, we were going to tell this story through David Capello. He was a survivor in the accident, and we thought we would take you through the process, show you where he was in his car. And we decided not to do that because, for many reasons, but one of which is if you're trying to give a sense of what happened, we don't know exactly what happened, where he fell off the bridge, how his car fell, that kind of thing. So we decided to concentrate more on the bridge and for that reconstruct. So all of these are the printouts that Jim and Gaia used back here and then drew on them and then sent them back. All right, so we actually considered using this as a style for the final presentation. This sort of hand-drawn, this was from a product called Rhino, which is great for quick modeling. To do a hand-drawn thing, show some shadows, but it actually, in terms of the visual hierarchy, it's very tough to see the bridge against the rest of the background. So we didn't go with this style. So this was the quote from David, a firefighter here in town, who was on the bridge and survived. And so Jim and Gaia talked to him at great length about what happened from his perspective, the rumble that he heard, the falling, the fact that he was trapped in his vehicle for a while. And these are all in the story, but for us from a visualization standpoint, it's great for the story, but we're not able to use that as part of a reconstruction. This came out a couple of days after. So Kostak Studio, this is a guy in Berlin, and he does these kinds of animations. So he had a whole demo reel of these different scenarios and what might have happened. And this is fascinating. And I've watched the whole thing, all of the different scenarios again and again. It's actually, it's quite good, but we can't use that. We can't use it because, I'll show it one more time, or maybe I won't. We can't use this because we don't know that all of these things happen. We don't know that this collapsed and each moment of this animation is correct. So instead of interpolating between these key points, we decided to just show you the key points that we felt confident were correct. Although this is incredible. So here's the final version of that sequence without any words, but just the sequence in terms of the key moments that we thought we would show and that would be helpful to show, and also the way in which we showed the uncertainty. So for starters, the visual hierarchy I talked about before, well, we're taking the bridge off of the background, right? We're trying to make sure that the context that's behind the bridge is just context. It's nothing more. It's not there to enhance the image at all. It's just there for your reference. This was the first part that we changed quite a bit. And in my next few slides after this will be the different versions we had of this. So you'll notice the wide arrows. This is one way in which we're showing the uncertainty. We do this a lot. If we don't know exactly how something happened, we'll use different visual techniques, one of which is a wide sort of sweeping arrow. And general, this dotted line, there's a dotted line sort of along the stays, the southern stays. We'll use those techniques to show this is an illustration, but it is not by any means an exact science, right? All right, so we knew that the two sections fell to the ground first, before the rest of the bridge collapsed. We knew that, and we knew that in the middle of the stay, things crumbled. We didn't know how exactly, so we figured this was the best way to show that. Notice the transparency along the stays, the southern stays. That transparency is there because we didn't know exactly where it broke. Right? So we're getting around some of the things, some of the exact science by being very general. And we do that a lot because we just want to make sure that we're not over-representing what we're showing. Notice the transparency again on that middle section. So we're using the same technique to say, we know this happened next, we just don't know where exactly it happened. But it gives you a sense for the timing of everything. Bridge falls, and then the tower falls to the ground, about 300 feet down. Okay, so let's walk through the versions of that as we knew what we knew along the way. So initially we thought we would show the entire length of the bridge. We decided, no, let's zoom in a little bit and change the angle. But this presented a problem because if you look at frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, if you start moving, zooming in and out of something and jumping around a lot, it's difficult to compare one frame to another. So the fourth version of this we were finally zoomed in. Was there a third version? Yeah, version 3 was far out, version 4 is close in, but essentially the same frame. The second frame, notice all of that rubble in the middle of the stay, how it's broken, the way in which it's turned. That was something that later we decided was a little too much of a representation of what might have happened. So instead, we started focusing on the southern stays breaking, and we wanted that step before you got to the breaking of the concrete. So notice the thin arrows. The thin arrows sort of imply that there's an exactness to this that we didn't have. So that's why we went with something a little wider, and that's why we went with the transparency along the yellow southern stays. Version 3 just had some more context, and the final version, version 4, is when we made everything a little more expansive. Again, with the crumbling for the third frame of this, we left the car on the bridge because even then we were thinking we would have this story. That would be our narrative thread throughout the visualization as well, but we got rid of all the cars. We decided to highlight the 3 different sections, but you'll notice frame 3 of this doesn't show that middle section breaking, so then in the final version, I guess this isn't final, but close to final, we just show 4 sections in the middle to imply that it did break in the middle. We knew that before the ends collapsed, and then final version had more context. Let's see, frame 1, version 1, too much going on here. Too much is implied about what actually happened. We clean that up. Let's see, so frame 4, we're showing the other stays breaking but not showing the exact point. We add that transparency to the middle section because, again, we don't know exactly where that broke. Add more context for the surrounding area. And the final frame, even early on, we had an idea of where the debris was for the final frame because we had the drone footage. We had the first responder cell phone images. We had no shortage of stuff to show us where the debris was on the ground after the fact. More context, and then finally when everything collapses. And I spent a good day or two on this particular aspect of it because this became important for the first responders, how difficult it was to find people in this situation, also where they may have been, and then how some of these sections incorporated, how they landed and incorporated into the surrounding area. So this is a very sort of rough representation visually of the different pieces because you don't see a lot of small rubble. But this is a pretty good representation of where everything broke and a general shape to all of the pieces that were on the ground. And the final versions, you'll notice that we locked this down pretty early. The final versions only had, the updated versions only had the context change. So combining all these assets. So we know we have a representation, a 3D representation. We know we have some photos that were taken after. Again, more sketches. This is my boss telling me what we should do with this story. He does this sometimes. It says Jeremy shines up in the upper right. He'll do this sometimes just to add pressure to me to get it right, to make sure it's good. And then some, as you scroll down, some assets that might be necessary for the page. We use a versioning management system. We use Get, which means that we can collaborate. Many people can be involved in the project. I just wanted to show you the number of commits or changes to this project that we had over time. You'll notice the names change. Some of the timestamps are very close together. We're all working on different aspects of this project, right? This was September 5th, I think. So that's how many changes you saw in a single day. And yeah, that was all September 5th. This is September 4th, down to the 2nd, and then we'll get to the first commit that Andy Rosbach made. So Andy Rosbach was the designer on the project who put all of the assets together, and then we were constantly adding things to the project. So that gives you a little bit of an idea how long it takes and how many people are involved and how many changes are made to a project like this. So, and I think this is the project. Good? Done? Yeah? Okay. And this is the final version in Italian. So you see that drone footage we decided on for the top. That in the end I color corrected that and made some edits so that it would loop in a better way. And then here is that those 3D renders with the language on top. So we have the labels, we have a little bit more context, we give you a description of what's happening over the course of those 5 different timestamps. So now that you know what didn't go into the project and what we left out and how we changed some things, it gets to be a little more interesting and why we chose to go this route and then the words that we chose to go with it. And along with this top render, and we knew we were going to have something like this, we didn't know what the other assets might be. A lot of the things we didn't end up using, but some of the most visually compelling were the photos after. And then some of the early construction photos that we were able to find. Here is that cross section. We don't talk about the pre-stressed concrete that much. Here's a comparison, that final graphic that we used for a modern cable stay bridge, and then some of the aftermath. So I will say that this particular project is unique in the way that we started presenting some of our work to the people that could verify what we were doing. And we'll continue to do that because it's very valuable. We're not able to do it in every situation. I'm doing that now on a project about guns. So the gun industry in the US. So I'm actually showing people before the story runs just to get their feedback to make sure we get it right. Thank you.